Jontavius, there was a girl playing an accordion or flute when we were here in 2019. You know what I'm talking about?
Are we all ready?
Welcome to the Centrum Foundation Blues Talks. This is the second Blues Talk of the series. And my name is Mark Puryear. I'm your host for the series. And today we have a really wonderful panel of artists who combined really have a deep impact on the blues in general, and especially here at Centrum. So without further my yabbing, I want to introduce Phil Wigginson. Phil, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, let's see. I'm Phil Wiggins. I play the harmonica, and I sing, and I make up songs. And born in Washington, D.C., first generation above the Mason-Dixon line. My family is from Titusville, Alabama, which is a little neighborhood right outside of Birmingham, Alabama. So I guess one thing I'd like you to know about me is that I always grew up believing that the definition of home was my grandma's house in Titusville, Alabama. Because whenever my mother spoke of home, that's what she meant. And I could tell that she was either talking to my grandma or thinking about my grandma or thinking about going home sometime soon because she would get her Alabama accent back. So
Nice.
that's
Thank you.
all right.
And next we have Mary Flower, a very accomplished guitarist with a lot of experience. And actually, Mary, I won't get into it, but tell us about yourself.
Wow, I'm not sure where to start. Born in Indiana, spent a lot of years in Denver. Now I live in Portland, Oregon. I play solo and I have a little band at home that I work with, a little string band. I take a lot of artistic liberties with various blues songs, so much so that they might even not be recognized. But it's fun to play with a traditional progression and turn it into your own. I write, I play the lap style guitar, and I am loving being here at Port Townsend.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And next we have Hubby Jenkins, and Hubby hails from the East Coast as well. But Hubby, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I'm Hubby Jenkins. I'm from Brooklyn, New York. And I play old time music and talk about black people. And I've been doing that for quite a while. And when I talk about old time music, I encompass a lot of different things. And yeah, just glad to be here and jamming out with all these fine musicians, good people.
All right, great. And Jerron, by the way, many of you know, has been artistic director here at Centrum. But Jerron, please tell us about yourself.
I am Jerron Paxton. I come from the western end of the Chitlin Circuit in South Central Los Angeles, the land of Sanford and Son, not the Beach Boys. Just so you know where my culture lies. My family immigrated ain't the right word, but it kind of fits. My family immigrated from behind the cotton curtain, not the iron curtain, but the cotton curtain, in the mid-50s to Los Angeles, bringing the music and the food, the cuisine with them. And I was very fortunate to grow up around a rich tradition of older people who were in their spirits throwbacks. You know, my grandparents were looking back to the days of their grandparents in certain things, you know, and that allowed me to grow up with a very deep sense of culture that was, you know, 3 or 4 generations beyond me. And that shows up in my music on good days when I'm fully caffeinated and
Sounds good.
all those good things.
So I hear a theme that I'd like to explore, and that is that, well, a couple of themes. One is migration, as you just mentioned, the movement of people. And many of the blues histories and stories talk about that, the movement of people from the South. They generally talk about the Southeast. But I'd like to pose the question, as Ron, you mentioned, that most of it was movement either west, east, north. It didn't just happen on the eastern seaboard or Mississippi, Chicago route. People moved all over. And if you could expound a bit about those experiences in your families or in your own life?
There was a excuse me, there was an idea I had always heard people express that folks from Louisiana were scared of going through Mississippi to get to Chicago. So a lot of them ended up out west. And the connection between Southern California, California in general, but especially Southern California, Louisiana, goes back almost to the 19th century. Everybody knows the song Trouble in Mind that was written in Louisiana. There's another one that Jelly Roll Morton called Mamie's Blues. They both reference the train 219. 219 took my baby away, 217 bring her back someday. I'm gonna lay my head on that lonesome railroad line, let 219 pacify my mind. 219 is the train that left the city of New Orleans, ended up at Santa Fe Station in Los Angeles. It was a direct line. You could be there in about a day and a half, whereas if you were coming from Chicago, that would take 3 days. Now, Vladimir Horowitz said that he quit his music career because he spent the first 14 or 16 years of his life on the train. 2 shows a week, 3 days between trains getting there. So, we got it bad getting off a plane and going to a hotel. 3 days on a train to get to a gig. Wow. You finish that gig, you get another 3 days on the train. And this country's big, So I'm starting to digress, but the access of the West Coast to people from Louisiana was a big deal in their culture, so much so that jazz from Louisiana was brought out to the West Coast before it was brought anywhere. The rest of the country didn't get jazz music till 1917. People were playing jazz music notably in California early as 1904, 1908, but lots of folks said, oh, my folks came here playing jazz in 1891 before they settled up in Los Angeles, Yeah. So there's always been a direct path from Louisiana to the West Coast. Yeah. That's why you find the only place that has more Creoles, Cajuns, and Choctaw Indians outside of Louisiana is the state of California.
Yes.
All that you get blue runner beans in California where you can't get them no place else.
All right.
And good boudin.
Well, hubby.
There's boudin.
Boudin, Compton.
Yeah.
Break that song for me.
No.
Hubby, tell us about your family history a little bit. Good.
Sure. I mean, I grew up with 2 moms, and one of my moms moved from Puerto Rico to New York in like the 70s, which there was like another influx of Puerto Ricans moving into the Americas, but that's something that goes way back into the 19th century as well. Puerto Ricans coming to work and do all sorts of things in the Americas and in New York. And then on my other mom's side of the family, they come from a town called Reedsville in North Carolina.
I was just there.
In Reedsville?
In Reedsville.
You got lost? The car broke down?
Yeah, I was on my way to Eaton.
Okay.
Reedsville. Wow, that's where y'all from.
But yeah, that's where they come from on that side. And my mom and her generation were the first generation in New York. My family left Reedsville in the 50s too. And although a bunch of people went back after the blackout in '76, they were like, "Forget this. We're gonna leave New York City." And so just having that, and my thinking about just personal roots, like your connections, the family going way back. My family was very much so the opposite. Of like, we're moving forward. We're done with this stuff. We're out of the South. We're not listening to Grand Ole Opry no more. None of that. So when I got older and like with Chocolate Drops, when I played the Grand Ole Opry, I was like, "You guys ever heard this Grand Ole Opry?" And they're like, "Oh, we love the Grand." Like but it's something I'd never been raised with or taught with because we were in New York City. Like, no, we're out of that, which is another way of that migration can affect people. Like what you bring with you and then how you adapt when you get to this place that you're in. And I also had a fun experience of interviewing my family, doing like a family history project with some of the elders, and I would like be at my great aunt's house, and they had like that room in the front of the house where all the furniture's covered in plastic, and there's a picture of every grandkid and the entire family there.
Holographic Jesus.
Like, yeah, exactly. Nobody sits in that room ever, and there's a piano in that room, and my entire child was like, "What? Why is there a piano? What room is this?" And I was doing all these interviews, and I was there, like noodling on my banjo or whatever before people came. Like, "Oh, that's fine on the banjo, but why don't you play me something on the piano?" I was like, "I don't play the piano." Like, really? Like, all the Wheelers, they all piano players. And I was like, "Tell me about it." And like, once I was older, that I learned that like everybody thought of my family as like the piano playing blues family in Reedsville.
Wow.
But that was something that my grandfather played in his church when he got to New York, and then that was it. So I never heard about this stuff that was, I guess, in my DNA or in my ancestral atmosphere. So just to piggyback off of that, to finish my point of just like the adapting and what changes, and then what is always lying there with that great migration.
That's good that you're really thinking, critically about that too, because there's a lot going on. I mean, what people, as you said, leave behind when they move, wherever they move, could be language, could be the accents, things that would tag you in the new place as being away from it. That sort of being from away. It's a very good point, because I think, African-American families had to, most minority families in America had to deal with another layer added on, not just, I'm Italian and I've got to lose the Italian accent and whatever. It's the thing we have constructed here in this country, I'm beating around the bush, it's race. So, Mary, tell us about you. I mean, you've just said that in your little intro, you've moved around quite a bit, but.
I moved around. My family did not.
Okay.
No migration in my family. I'll be honest from the start. But I had a very traditional family. My father ran the weekly newspaper, the Democratic newspaper,
All right.
in my little town. And I was the last of 6 kids, and everybody could sing harmony, and there was 3-part harmony around the table. It was a very nurturing, and the folk movement came along and bit me really hard. And I spent my teenage years dropping the needle back to try to figure out guitar parts and stuff. And that's how I learned. Today I'm the only one out of the 6 that still has music in my life.
Oh,
But that's okay, because they're all very supportive. So,
good.
yeah.
Yeah. So, but when you moved out west.
Oh, myself, yeah.
Yeah. You talk a little bit about that. Was that a
Sure.
change hard, or was it something that was pretty easy?
I quit after 3 years at Indiana University,
Okay.
which has a great ethnomusicology department
Right.
that I, of course, didn't know about until it was too late. But I studied theater, and in the same class as, now I can't remember his name, some pretty people who turned into pretty famous people. And, but that wasn't really what I wanted to do, because I was playing music and it was getting in the way of my studies, And so, yeah, I was playing with a guy who was a great piano player, singer, songwriter, and we got a gig in Colorado, which got us out of this small town. And we moved and played at a ski resort for the winter. And that's when everything started changing, and we'd go down into Denver. We were in Breckenridge, I think, and we'd go down into Denver and hang out at the Folklore Center, which was really a great spot. And eventually, after 30 years there of being married, and my ex-husband spent a lot of time with Gary Davis, so he was always playing that stuff. It drilled into my head, And anyway, so I moved after the divorce and went to Portland, where my son was, and happily ever after.
Oh, good. I'm glad of that. And so what about you, Phil? I mean, just so the audience knows, I've known Phil for quite a while, so some of this is he's probably feeling like he's repeating, but you're talk to other people besides me. So
Okay.
yeah.
And well, like I said, born in D.C.
Yeah.
And I grew up. So in my neighborhood, all the parents were like my parents, expats from the deep south.
Right.
And so, and of course they brought all that their foodways, their celebrations, with them, their traditions and all that. It's interesting because, people never really talk that much about sort of the downside of like immigration. They think, well, the black folks get to go to school with the white folks, and so that's got to be an improvement. But for me, what it meant in my neighborhood and in my culture was that a lot of our celebrations and a lot of our kind of traditions got lost, got given up. So that's one interesting thing. so I was born into a family of Baptists, and my father and my mother both like sang in the church choir, and my father, I found out later on, my father passed when I was 7, so a lot of what I know about him was from stories or, like really faded memories and all. And he played the piano. I don't have any real memory of him playing the piano, but I remember going to my grandfather's house and seeing a big old upright piano in there, and poking holes in the little canvas and all. So we were very destructive children. So, but so a lot of, but like kind of thinking back on it and thinking like there were. So my mother with my father had 3 boys and 1 girl, and then we wound it up. Like I said, my father passed and my mother remarried, and we wound up getting into an AME church, which probably a little more on that later. But the one thing that's important to know is they don't have very good music in the AME church. Well, I'm making all kinds of. But I feel like a lot of my youth, kind of wandering around Washington and Northern Virginia and all, that I was drawn to and sought out things that took me home, that reminded me of home, that felt like home. And so some of those things were folks like Flora Moulton and Mother Scott and Chief Ellis and Archie Edwards and eventually John, all those folks, they were from,
The South,
from the South, and they had ways and customs and ways of speaking and ways of doing things. I remember going to see Mother Scott. She turned out she didn't live too far from me, and she invited me to lunch, and it really felt almost exactly like being in my grandma's kitchen. It's like spotless clean and everything. She knows exactly where everything is because she put it there, and the food was like that. She had a jar of chow chow on the kitchen table, and
Y'all say chow chow out east. We say char char.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Cool.
Cha cha cha.
It's funny because when like during the shutdown, I was thinking of excuses to keep in close touch with my family, and I said, well, let's all reminisce on recipes that we remember from my mother and from my grandmother. And my brother William says, well, you can just Google it. I'm like, no, it's a way for us to talk and reminisce and in that way stay in touch. And it worked out really great. But it was funny because I actually recreated as far as I could, based on tastes and smells and colors, what I remembered of my grandma's chow chow recipe. And my younger brother, Charles, he said, well, I didn't know what you were talking about, because now that I remember what that was, I hated that stuff. Because it had cloves in it. I did not like having cloves in my mouth. I didn't. So I wound up like and one of the other places that I found like stuff that was like home was the Smithsonian Fest.
Right.
And I wound up, spending a lot of time wandering around there. I remember me and a friend of mine one time, we decided we were going to be winos for a day. And we went and got some Boone's Farm wine and put it in a brown paper bag and wandered around that festival and getting drunk. But I wound up jamming with like Johnny Shines,
Right.
and Robert Lockwood, and the Mississippi Sheiks. What's the singer?
Walter Vincent?
Sam Chapman.
Sam Chapman. And all these people, and I'm like, man, these guys are great. I didn't know who they were. I didn't realize that I'm sitting with icons of Mississippi Delta blues,
Right.
and East Coast blues and all. I'm like, man, but these guys are good. They're so much fun to play with, And here I was this teenager with like afro about that big, and raggedy jeans, and they accepted me. Yeah, they took me in.
When did you meet John Cephas, if I might? To ask that?
76 at that particular festival.
Wow.
At the Smithsonian Festival. He was there with Chief Ellis, who I found out, like I said, my father passed when I was 7. I had never, but Chief Ellis and him were schoolmates.
Yeah.
And I had no idea. Until during Jimmy Carter's inauguration, my mother came to town, and me and John and Chief had a gig at the train station. My mother comes in the room, and she looks over and says, "Wilbur, what are you doing here?" And she's talking to Chief, and it turns out they're from the same neighborhood in Titusville. Yeah.
Small world moment.
Yeah.
And you also traveled back as a youngster too, back and forth.
Yeah, I spent
Yeah.
a lot of summers down there. Yeah.
Yeah, because that was something I noticed. I'm from DC, but I noticed a lot of my classmates were gone in the summer. You know, because their families were migrants from the South.
Yeah.
And I'd have this wonderful school year, and I would, hey, what are we gonna do? And then we're gone.
Yeah.
And so for me, that was my awareness of it, because I had family in Virginia, actually near where John Jackson was from. My father's cousins were Rappahannock County people. So that was my country experience, but it wasn't like you go there for a month. You would go there for maybe a weekend, play in the creek and catch stuff. But
A question about
Yeah.
that part of the country. Did John Jackson, was he the only one that talked like that? Or was everyone from Rappahannock?
no, everyone doesn't speak that way, but I have heard people with something similar, a similar accent. And I went to the Historical Society. I don't want to take this too much into my family, but my mother taught in Washington, Virginia. She did her student teaching there. And my father would go to visit her, and she was being housed by a black family in Washington, Virginia. And one of the family members said, "Puryear, blah, blah, blah is," and my dad was an orphan, so he had sort of lost a little connection. And since then, I found where my grandmother's buried, and through that side of the family, my cousins, they put a burial ground together. It was already there, but they went and improved it. And I've been able to go back and see the headstones. And the burial grounds, the oldest, I think, are from late 1800s.
Wow.
But it's a black burial ground up in a hollow, right up in the foothills of Shenandoah. So it's pretty rich to find that as an adult. But that was that accent. And DC has its own. We can get into it, but my favorite things with DC is there's a F instead of an E, like you would say northeast, and there's a slang in DC, the northeast. Northeast. And it's just I consider it kind of just a sort of, because I didn't grow up speaking that way, but it seems like just a slip, instead of E, feast,
Yeah.
And there's some other words, I won't get into it, but there's some other words that people it's become a dialect in parts of the city.
Yes.
Well, can I tell
Yeah,
you what
sure.
John used to say about John Jackson? John Cephas used to say about John Jackson's accent. He said, "That's not an accent. That's a damn speech impediment."
Well, he ain't too far from wrong. Okay.
Funny.
It's something you mentioned, Phil, about the tradition of food. I find
Yeah.
with migration and integration and black people's natural propensity to be extremely creative. The downside of that is we don't get to hold on to much tradition.
yeah.
Everything changes every decade, half decade, at most 2 or 3 decades, and we change right along with it. Most of it. So there's always a few outliers that get called old souls and do the things that they learned from their grandparents. But the one thing we all keep is the cuisine. It seems that that's the only bit of tradition that seems to be passed on, more so than the music and the food. There's a little bit of the music that still gets passed on, and I wonder if it'll exist past my generation. You
Yes.
know, right now I can still go back to South Central and go, "You got me running,
Yeah.
you got me high," and everybody in the room will still join in with
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
I wonder if that'll be the same when I'm your age. You understand? It's I'm kind of on the border. I feel like it'll always be there, but
Yeah.
that's just because that's what I spent the entirety of my life with,
Yeah.
and up till yet. But I often wonder, and being the banjo player, and the person that holds on to some of the most traditional things as far back as I could get, I'm real sensitive to those things.
Yes. Yes.
So it's always good hearing about food and whatever culture, especially outside of food, musically and family history wise, we can carry on
John,
to
I
the
would,
next trip.
I would add one other thing to that, and that is fashion, dress in African American communities. I think dress is like food, in that people have brought those traditions forward. The styles, and it was almost out of necessity because in my side, my world, my ancestors had to make their own clothes.
Same here.
They couldn't go to the department
Same here.
store and buy,
Or
a
everything,
pre-made
everything
suit.
my folks was made. My folks grew up having croquet sack clothes
Yeah.
and flour sack clothes
But even
until
when-
1955.
Even when you went to high fashion, though, like I see pictures of in my family of aunts and aunties and uncles, and there's one I remember. This woman looks gorgeous, and
Yes.
all the elders said that outfit was made by a member of the family from a pattern, but they modified the pattern.
Yes.
See,
Yes.
so they would get a pattern, store-bought pattern,
Yeah.
and put their own jazz to it. And that's
But I think also like when you say like things change, all the things stay the same, right?
Yes.
Like right now, everyone's talking about 50 years of hip hop.
Right.
Right. And like you hear people talk about hip hop in like a very similar way. Like you're like,
Yeah.
oh, when we were doing it, we were just working class. This is music for our people. Like we made it ourselves. Maybe we stole stuff during the blackout, but that's how we got our instruments. They were
Yeah.
cheap. Like a lot of things stay the same within the culture. And it's 50 years later, people are like, are people still gonna be rapping like this? And like now EDM has changed hip hop. Now this blah blah. So we flow with it and change with it, but a lot of the core stays the same.
Yeah. Yeah,
I'm not worried about black people. Is what I'm trying to say.
Good,
I think
because I think to Jerron's point that the creativity is the resilience and the survival techniques that I'm saying this in a simplistic way, but to survive what people of African heritage have had to go through in the United States demands creativity, in a lot of ways.
Yes.
Because if you think of all the things people were confronted with, I mean the whole spectrum. But I think we're almost out. Are we out of time? Close.
Yeah, we got 129.
I think
Okay, got a minute. So
I think I'm the only person here that has a family history of doing the opposite of everything. People on the East Coast go down south during the summer. I was never allowed to go down south. My grandma said, "Ain't nothing in Louisiana for you. I ain't leaving nothing down there for you. Everything you got, we brought right here. Don't go down there. You got all the gumbo and the jambalaya and the
That
lightning
was the
hoppings
thing. So
right here."
you had all that stuff. You had the boudin and Compton, but I didn't have that in New York. So for my family, it's like, no, you have to go to Reedsville so you can have that connection to this stuff.
Why didn't you bring it with you?
Because that's what it was. My mom was second generation. The other people didn't bring that stuff. My mom's like, now we're hanging out with Puerto Ricans. Now we're doing this. We're doing New York stuff. So I went down south when I told them about the fish cakes and barbecue and had to go to church and do the whole thing. Like that's a very common thing, I guess, East Coast. But that was her way of getting me connected to that.
I understand there's not a lot of that culture. There's not a lot of down south black culture up in New York. And when I go up there, I feel just as foreign as I can. You might find somebody say, "Oh, my folk came from the Carolinas or Virginia," it's like that. But what you grew up listening to? "Oh, I grew up listening to white rock and roll." It's like, really?
Why are you looking right at me when you said that? What?
No,
well, on that note, I think we're gonna have to wrap it up.
that what you
And
you get caught out.
I hope everyone has enjoyed the conversation, because even though we didn't center on the music, we talked about the culture that the music comes from. And I think that's very important for us to understand these different roots and different pathways people have taken to this music. And Jerron, I think my sense is that there's going to be new people picking it up. It's something about this music that renews and attracts people. And I've had the same feelings that you're talking about, wondering if any years ago.
Talking about,
People coming and picking up the music.
it's got that Virginia in there.
About.
Talking about.
All right, well, we're done. It's like we could go on for another
I
hour.
found you now.
Yeah.
Thank you for calling me out on that. I want to thank John Paxton, Hubby Jenkins, Mary Flower, and Phil Wiggins for sharing their stories with us. And please join us again when we do this tomorrow. Thank you.
Amen.